So now, having talked a little bit about Thankwol, I think a lot of you guys have really been curious about IKIT Claw. I think there's points in the comments section where a lot of you guys have outright just said, hey, where's IKIT Claw? So today we're going to do just that. We're going to talk about a clan Skryre, an IKIT Claw, what they might look like in a dual Lord pack alongside, their not Skaven counterparts, but their Lizardman counterparts. If that dual Lord pack is indeed Lizardman and Skaven, as we know it will be, and if IKIT Claw is one of the options rather than Thankwol, what could IKIT Claw look like? What could Clan Skryre's campaign mechanics look like? Now, I know we're kind of going pretty heavily and very speculatively into what those campaign mechanics might look like, but if you guys have noted, every single Lord that has come to us as part of a campaign pack or a Lord pack since the birth of Total War Warhammer 2, they've had some sort of different mechanic. Alarielle, who we've talked about before, she has her whole mechanic with the Defenders of Ulthuan and her kind of like lingering public order bonuses. We've talked about Hellebron and how she has got the Death Knight, and then all of the Tomb Kings have their own campaign mechanics separate from the Vortex campaign itself. So how would IKIT Claw be different? And I have some good ideas for this. There might be complete crapshoots, but it is kind of a fun one I want to go through with you. So let's read the lore blurb with IKIT Claw as always, and then we'll jump into some fun stuff after that. IKIT Claw has taken Clan Skryre's mix of science and sorcery to new levels of complexity and depravity. Entire legions of Skaven slaves have been blasted to bits in the name of IKIT's experimental new weapons, a small price for the sheer power and killing might that IKIT has added to Clan Skryre's deadly arsenal. In his quest for knowledge, IKIT has traveled the world, stealing secrets from the mystics of Cathay, studying the dimension-spanning machines of Lustria, and toiling for years alongside the cruel forge masters of far-off Tsar Nagrand. Upon his return, IKIT found the warp forges of Clan Skryre woefully underdeveloped. It would take centuries to fully implement his grandiose changes. It was during the Great Civil War that IKIT seized his opportunity. As the newly assigned lead emissary of Lord Morskatar, the ruler of Clan Skryre, IKIT Claw ordered massive warp forges and unrivaled armories to be gnawed into the stone beneath Skavenblight. Infernal devices and diabolical weapons were soon being assembled on a level hitherto undraped. IKIT Claw was tall and white-furred before a failed experiment exploded and mangled his body. An intricate iron mask of his own invention now covers his hairless skull, and a cunningly wrought exoskeleton aids his withered left side. The iron contraption is run by a warp generator, a masterpiece of engineering that siphons the winds of magic to power IKIT's devilish inventions. Whirring cogs hiss and vent steam as the chief warlock moves, clanking like a fully armored knight. Like all Clan Skryre warlock engineers, IKIT has continued to tinker, adding a small warp fire projector and countless upgrades, including a warp stone locator. In combat, IKIT Claw wields Storm Demon, a halberd wrapped with copper wire coils and set with glowing warp stone. The blade crackles with barely suppressed energies as it draws power from the warp generator to hurl dark bolts of warp lightning. Now, I love IKIT Claw. He's probably one of my favorite lords of Skavendom. When I think of how I played them back in tabletop, I always really enjoyed Clan Eshin. The whole sneaky stabby kind of thing was cool. Thankwol was a cool model during the end times, and I wasn't a huge fan of him when I played Skaven way back in like 6th edition. But IKIT Claw has always been kind of cool because he's this Skaven in Space Marine power armor. And he has basically a Force Halberd from the Grey Knights chapter of Space Marines. So you have a very different Lord here. You have a heavily armored, tanky, warlock casting Lord. And that's what you get with IKIT Claw. I mean, he has access to the entire lore of Ruin. The Skaven Warlock Engineers have this. So IKIT Claw is, again, that special character, that Lord option for the gentleman, the general that wants to be that Warlock Engineer. And I think he's got a lot of really cool weapons here. So for one, he's got the Iron Frame. This is what we talked about, his power armor, what he's pretty much been, he's casted himself into, his powered exoskeleton. It's kind of funny as a quick side note. It talks about the fact that he was white-furred before, and we've talked about how the albino Skaven typically were marked for something. They usually became like the guards to the the Council of 13. So it's interesting that he was able to kind of somehow sidestep that and become an engineer. But you know what? That's not like Games Workshop's ever gone over their own lore before. But still, that aside, the Iron Frame here is basically his power armor, and it dictates that he's essentially a tank. I mean, he's got a 3-up armor save and a 5-up ward save in tabletop. So I would look at that as an armor that in Total War Warhammer, as far as a campaign mechanic, vastly increases his armor, vastly increases his melee defense, but also at the same time gives him a ward save, which is pretty cool, right? It's pretty awesome for this tanky, considerably heavy feeling lord. You know, you want this guy to be able to kind of get up close and personal and do some damage. And he does have, you know, they talked about, adding a small warp fire projector and countless upgrades to his armor. Well, as a part of that, he actually has in his armor a warp fire thrower. One of his arms is actually like this 3 or 4 pronged claw with like a little nozzle at the end of it that shoots warp fire out of it. So imagine this lord, which is pretty scary. He is a tanky Skaven lord with the entire access to the lore of Ruin, with the ability to just douse people in warp fire. I think that's a really cool mechanic. I mean, this guy, I think of him as kind of like this dual threat on the battlefield. When you look at his range profile, I would look at it as AP and anti-infantry, because, you know, it's warp fire. I think it's just going to melt through crap. And his halberd, which we'll get into in just a second, I look at it as anti-large and AP. So he kind of has that like Marathi role, right? Where Marathi has got this anti-large, this AP kind of role built into her, but also a caster at the same time. Now, clearly not as tanky as IKIT Claw sounds on paper, but that's what I think would be kind of nifty about this guy is, okay, I'm going to charge him with something, with an elite infantry unit, like Phoenix Guard. Oh, well, Warp Fire Thrower, it's going to start mulching through them as they charge up to IKIT Claw. Well, you know what? I'm going to throw a Carnosaur at him. Well, IKIT Claw's tanky enough to take the Carnosaur charge, and he's got enough actual threat as far from his halberd to actually deal some damage to it. But let's talk about Storm Demon. Storm Demon is a magic halberd, and it ignores armor saves. It's directly from the book there. So again, AP, anti-large, like we see throughout all the other halberds in Total War Warhammer. But in addition to this, it can shoot a bolt of dark lightning from its tip. And that's just rad. So kind of think of like the Hand of the Gods, or even Durthu's sword, which enables you to kind of launch a magic missile from it. So IKIT Claw is basically this little tiny rat on the on the battlefield that is just spewing warp fire everywhere, shooting lightning bolts all over the place, and just cleaving down large beasts. I mean, if you think of it from that standpoint, he's a pretty cool, fun lord, and that's what I really dig about him. Now, the Storm Demon, again, I would just assume that this would be an anti-large, an AP weapon, magic attacks for sure, and I think that it would have the bound ability to use this proverbial Storm Demon. You know, I don't want to say it's like a bound spell for Warp Lightning. I think he would just have a bound spell for Warp Lightning by default. In his actual profile, he has a bit of an emphasis towards it, so that he can substitute one spell of the Lore of Ruin for Warp Lightning if he so chooses. So I think that would be one of IKIT Claw's things. He would have Warp Lightning as a bound ability and Storm Demon as a bound ability. So maybe 1 or 2 charges of this thing, just like we see with Durthu's sword, right? So the ability just to launch a real quick, hard-hitting, heavy AP, because this thing it's a strength 5 hit in the tabletop, and it does an artillery dice worth of hits. So this thing is ready to dish out some damage. So that's what I really like about this guy, is he just seems so unassuming, but he is ready. He plays for keeps. He's ready to just deliver the punishment. Now, there is a misfire chart in the tabletop, but I think that's not really worth talking about, because unfortunately a lot of the really cool random Skaven elements from tabletop didn't quite make them into Total War Warhammer. So to spend a lot of time speculating on, what would that misfire look like? Not as likely of a scenario, so let's just kind of skirt over that. But what would his Total War Warhammer campaign mechanics would be like? Where would he start on the map, for one? And that's a real easy one, right? So we know for a fact that Clan Skryre is already in the game. They're already in the jungle of green mists. You know, if you're playing as Skrulk, if you're playing as Mazdamundi, or if you're playing as Teclis, you've probably already run into these chaps. But they're right there in the jungle of green mist, in the pillars of the unseen constellation, pretty much smack dab in the middle of that little province. So we have a starting location for them. That kind of begs the question of, where would the lizardmen start on Lustria, if they do in fact start on Lustria during this expansion. So that we'll speculate that a little bit when we start to talk about what those Lisbon lords might possibly be and where they might possibly stay. I mean, like Itza's right here, and Lord Croak is from Itza, so that would make a lot of sense. Itza Pizza, so that make a lot of sense. Smack dab between two Skaven lords. That could be a lot of fun. But again, it's not about Skrulk right now, right? About IKIT. So IKIT starts in the jungles of Green Mist. That's what I'm going to say. That's the assumption I'm going to make. On the Mortal Empires map, we know Clan Skryre to start in Skaven Blight. So again, we kind of have these things already called out for us. They're already here on the map. We already see the Clan Skryre starts there if you've already started the game. There's a chance that they could be moved with the campaign pack. You know, they've done that before with the Tomb Kings. All of Araby was pretty much moved around from the Bretonnian Errantry Kingdoms and Sudenburg, and it was kind of split up. So let's think about this then. What could Clan Skryre's campaign mechanics be like? Because that's kind of been plaguing me. Indie Pride, excuse me, Indie Pride and I were talking about this, like, what would it be like? And I couldn't come up with anything on the spot. But now that I kind of mull it over, Clan Skryre's big claim to fame is their industriousness, is their level of trade, their level to provide, their ability to provide weapons teams to other clans, and really kind of being more economical than outright combative. But they're more research-based, they're more science-based. Again, industry. So what would be really cool is if Clan Skryre almost kind of had, it's not, I'm going to use the word geomantic web because we're all familiar with it. But what if Clan Skryre had the ability to set up Clan Skryre warp pillars, warp nodes, something that like almost like a giant Tesla coil, because you know Tesla coils, they're kind of like this weird zany science in a lot of ways. Nikolai Tesla totally aside, but like you think of like, oh, like fictitious steampunk level technology, you think of Tesla coils. That kind of comes to mind. So what if you had these just super perverse Tesla coils that you could build in either in nation capitals, or you needed some sort of resource, like warpstone was a resource across the map that you have to find these buildings, and you can build the warpstone, or you can build the warp Tesla coils there, the warp coils if you want to call them that. And these warp coils help channel energy in between certain locations. Again, just like the geomantic web. And the ability here is to further that along for Clan Skryre, right? Wouldn't that be really awesome? Is if Clan Skryre's goal was to kind of complete this link of all of these warp coils that eventually, that what they do is, I guess, as they kind of progress up the level of power, maybe have a gauge that's got like a green gauge that's filling up maybe directly below the food bar that kind of shows more and more increase into this proverbial, you know, warp core or warp research, whatever you want to call it. But it's basically Clan Skryre trying to rev up more and more research capabilities. And when you do this, you get an increase to your research rate. You get a reduction in cost to Clan Skryre native units like weapons teams and poison globadiers, warp lightning cannons, warlock engineers come out with higher ranks, stuff like that. So it's things that really start to boost the Clan Skryre's bonuses. In addition to that, maybe it increases your trade goods. And I know that sounds weird, right? It sounds weird to talk about Skaven mechanics and have economy being the centerpiece of them, but Tretch Craventail comes from Clan Rictus, right? And Clan Rictus is only important because they're in a place geographically on the map that allows them to maximize their slave trade. Trade is actually a huge part of the Skaven Under Empire, and I think Clan Skryre and Clan Moldor are extremely well off, lucrative, because of their ability to trade in beasts and tools of war. So imagine IKIT Claw's campaign mechanic again being derived off this mentality of increasing the power that's being used in between all these Skaven settlements to increase the research of, you know, warp technology, whatever it is, and not like faster than light warp, but I mean like this ability to really kind of link things together. So again, you have this reduction in cost of things, and maybe you have a public order bonus, maybe because there's such a good increase to technology at a certain threshold, you have a food consumption reduction because you're able to maximize food rations or something like that. And maybe at the top tier of these things, all of your Skaven, all the towers for your building, for your province, become, rather than being like, oh, this is just a tower that shoots lightning bolts, or I'm sorry, that shoots arrows, they become Tesla coils. That is such a stretch. It is so far out there. But I mean, at the same time, it's not completely strange that Creative Assembly would take an existing mechanic, the geomantic web, and turn it on its head, make it fit into something that would make a lot of sense that it fit into. Again, Clan Skryre. So this kind of concludes my thoughts here on IKIT Claw. I think that it'd be, again, a very different approach to IKIT and a very different approach to Skaven. I think with Tretch and Queek, we have two very similar lords, and I think Skrulk is, again, he's similar to all three of them. You know, you have a lord on a mount, you have this lord that's kind of trying to spread corruption, Skaven corruption, throw all out the place. Maybe Skaven corruption isn't a part of Clan Skryre. Maybe technological innovation is something that's replaces Skaven corruption, and maybe, oh, okay, well, this land is rife with warp dust, so it's good for Winds of Magic production, and thus it's better for technological pursuits. Thus, we can build a warp coil here, whatever it is. So I think that taking a step away from the mold of Skaven is what's going to make this lord hopefully a different approach to Skaven in a really positive way. You know, if we look at Tyrion and Alarielle, I'm sorry, yeah, I guess Tyrion and Alarielle, it's such a different way to play the game. Or we take a look at the campaign mechanics for a Lithanar. He doesn't have anywhere near the same mechanics as Tyrion, right? But when you take a look at Tyrion and Teclis, they're the same mechanics, different lord. You look at Marathi and Malekith, again, very similar mechanics, different lord. Queek and Skrulk, blah, blah, blah. I can go on and on. So to add a whole diverse, different way to approach that lord, I think that's what they've been focusing on campaign packs, on lord packs, and we have another campaign pack coming out, so we know that's going to be a different variation of mechanic, and we have another lord pack coming out, so we know we're going to get something special there. So let me know in the comment section below, guys, what you guys think about how Clan Skryre could be incorporated in the game in a different way. If you think it's just going to be a same old, go ahead and let me know. I'm fine with that. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, check out my Patreon, all that cool kind of fun action here today. But have a good one, guys, and take care.